Right. Hello. Welcome to the next instalment of our Project Nolan that we're doing as part of the South Sefton Scribbles blog, vlog, and whatever, the podcast as well. I'm Nick Sayward, Media Studies teacher at the South Sefton campus of Hugh Bed College. And as always, is joining me is Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Nick.
It's been a little while since we've done this. Had a bit of a break, but we've only got a few of Nolan's films left to do. So we're in the top three of Christopher Nolan's movies, and this is an interesting one because it came in at number 2 on your list, and it was actually number 7 on mine. So there's quite a discrepancy where we had a few on our list like The Prestige and Dark Knight Rises and Dark Knight that fell into the same positions. We're now at a place where there's a bit of discrepancy. And the film that we're going to talk about is Christopher Nolan's ninth movie, to get that right, and that is the science fiction film Interstellar. This came out in 2014. It was after he'd finished the Dark Knight Rises trilogy. We talked previously about how Warner Brothers seemed to informally let him do a kind of a film for them in the Batman films and a film for himself, which resulted in The Prestige and Inception. And this was after he'd completed the Dark Knight trilogy, so presumably he had a bit more of a free rein in terms of time taken, a budget and whatnot, because those films clawed in billions of dollars. And so the very first film, when sort of freed of the shackles of a franchise, was this movie Interstellar. And as always, Matt, I'm going to hand over to you at this point and to just give us a synopsis of the film.
Okay. Well, Interstellar is another one of the Nolan's films that he wrote with his brother Jonathan, or Jonah. But they also had a third writer on board, which is a theoretical physicist, Kip Thorne. And so the film follows a character called Cooper, and it's set in the future. And in the future, an unspecified event has led to a disaster on Earth, basically. And ultimately, thinking about Tenet, the entropy of the world is forefront in the film, and basically the human race has to find a solution to that problem. So Cooper is a former astronaut who is now, because of the environmental disasters, is working as a farmer. So basically, throughout the course of the film, he has a close relationship with his daughter, Murphy. And at one point near the start of the film, they capture a drone, an Indian drone. And eventually, they start seeing some gravitational or strange anomalies, maybe supernatural anomalies taking place in the house. And when Cooper goes to investigate this, he uncovers like the secret NASA base. And when he gets there, he's informed that there is one last mission to try and save humanity. It's like the Hail Mary, so to speak, for humanity. So Cooper has to make a decision. Is he going to stay at home with his daughter, or is he going to go out into the cosmos and try and find Earth a new home? Cooper ultimately makes the decision to leave, and he goes on a journey through intergalactic space searching for a new home. And underpinning this is the relationship between Cooper and Murphy. And at the film, that starts the film, they're very close. And the further Cooper gets away, both literally, in terms of distance, and emotionally, and their relationship starts to break down. So then Cooper, at the end of the film, when they try and almost find a solution to humanity's problems, he tries to use that to sort of get back to Murphy and reconnect with his daughter.
Excellent. Yeah, that's it's an interesting one, I think, Interstellar, for the fact that it's one of the few films that you can describe the entire synopsis without giving away too many spoilers. Because quite often these movies have something so significant throughout the film that's mini twists throughout the film. I think in some ways, amongst his fans, this is arguably his most movie, because fans wanted to really know what he was going to do post the Dark Knight trilogy. How did when you saw it, how did you react to that as being the first movie? Were you surprised, or was this what you expected, or was it a curveball?
It wasn't a surprise, because obviously he works in genres, and then not reinvents, but he always brings something new to the genre. So I remember when it was announced that he was doing a sci-fi epic with a huge budget, I was very excited to see just how Nolan is attack that. And I remember when I first saw the film, I was just absolutely overwhelmed by it and blown away by it. I remember, I think I had a text or spoke to you recently after saying I think it's my #1 Nolan film. Yeah. And I remember, can't remember what you said, but I got the impression that you were surprised by that. And I always knew that maybe you didn't like it as much as me. But one thing I really love about it, one thing that did surprise me, is that it's not as strongly focused on narrative as this one.
No,
I think one of the things I like about the film, and one of the things that seems evident to me, is that while it's quite a personal story, he's also trying to answer some of his critics, I think, and he's trying to demonstrate another side to his filmmaking that maybe is missing from his earlier work, or what some people accuse him of being absent from his earlier work.
This is right. We've talked about this because we analysed and did reviews of a lot of his earlier movies early on in this process. A project that's part of the criticism of his films is that they're fairly cold, that they don't necessarily allow us to identify with characters, or the characters aren't particularly likable, or in that way, and they don't have the heart that a movie should. But you feel this corrects that?
For me personally, I think it does. I think the film has a lot of heart, and there's a line in the film from Anne Hathaway's Dr. Brands, which I think sums up the entire message of the film. When they're all scientists, and there's a lot of scientific talk and jargon, and it's all about facts and reality. And she just says to Cooper, there are some things that transcend space and time and our perception, and love is one of those things.
Yeah.
And I think at the core of the film, it's got a really strong emotional heart.
That's the key message. That's the thing I took away, is that is the key message of the movie, and it's quite clever because, and it's he's not the first person to have done this, but he's wrapped up a film about strong familial relationships and the power of love in a genre which can look cold and clinical and sterile, and that's his twist in this movie. If anything, that what you thought you were going to see is something different. And how I feel about this movie, and my appreciation has definitely grown over time. I think my first viewing was, and I do this to myself too often, is when it gets marred by the anticipation. I'm so excited by a film that you're like, oh, that if it wasn't what I was expecting, that can throw me a little. But on reflection, this has the sterile and clinical and the beautiful look of Stanley Kubrick movies.
Yeah.
The attention to detail, and I'm sure we'll talk about the visual aesthetics of this, is so inspired by Kubrick and 2001. And I think people love Nolan so much as a filmmaker that they'd say, yeah, he's made a new Kubrick movie. But actually, what he's very cleverly done is the core of this movie, he's gone to one of the other filmmakers who he adores, and actually I think secretly wants to be, and that's Steven Spielberg. Because you've got the family movie and all the Spielberg touches and hugs that a Spielberg movie has. This is actually much closer to Close Encounters of the Third Kind or E.T. than it is 2001. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you look at 2001, it's like one of the coldest films ever made. There's just no emotion in it at all, and it serves that film perfectly. And you're right, and that's one of the things I was maybe not surprised about, but really I was in awe of the film the first time I saw it. It was how cinematic it was, and how familiar the shots of space felt. But you're right. I mean, I was quite surprised by how emotional it was, and I don't know. Obviously, if any of our students are watching this is a point relating to spectatorship and where meaning comes from in a film. But as in 2014, in year 2012 and 2013, I had two babies, two daughters back to back. So, I've got no problem admitting it. When I saw the film in the cinema, I was an emotional wreck at the end, because at the end for me, the question posed by Nolan, who I didn't realize this, but he's got, I think, 5 kids now.
Oh, right.
In Nolan, so he's obviously a family man as well. But at the end of the film, when Cooper, let's go into spoilers, but basically he poses the question, how much and how far would you go for the minimal time with your child? And if the film answers the question, they will go back.
Yeah. And it's really funny you should mention that, because of course one of the key differences between you and I in 2014 was that, as you said, you had 2 kids back to back. I didn't have any children at that point, and I've not seen until this we're doing this project. And it does change my outlook on it completely. The moment that Cooper, and we are, I suppose we're spoiler territory, does decide to leave Murph, it is so much more heartbreaking now watching that. And you put yourself in your shoes and you go, I don't know if I could make that first step, let alone the traveling through space and time. And do you know what? I've been trying to avoid reviews of all of these movies while we've been doing our own, but I accidentally stumbled across one. I know it sounds odd, but I was listening to an Adam Buxton podcast where he interviewed the Radiohead guitarist Ed O'Brien.
Yeah.
And Ed O'Brien said that Interstellar is possibly his favorite movie. He absolutely loves it.
Yeah.
And they got on talking about how having children informs your reading of the text.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even considered this when I watched it last month, but the fact that a lot of the film tackles the idea that time is relative. And so when they go to some planets to see if they're habitable, it only a few minutes elapses for those on the planet's surface, but several years happens on board the spaceship. And the same thing happens to Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey, and his daughter Murph. And he has to watch her grow up.
Yeah.
But we know that for her, she's growing up from the age of 14, 15.
Yeah, it's 19 years, the time.
19 years.
Yeah.
Whereas for him, it happens very, very quickly. And it's not even a metaphor. It's just telling you that as a child, your life goes slowly, but as a parent, you watch them grow up far too quickly. And that idea is so brilliantly told. It's really moving.
You know? Oh yeah. And I think that's why the film still resonates. I mean, I find that I love it more and more every time I watch it, and I become more and more emotional, even though I know what's coming. And it's because of that, because it's almost paralleled out. My daughters are now 6 and 8. Yeah. So I get that feeling totally.
Oh, when they get to Murph's age, you're going to be a wreck.
I don't know.
So it is, it has got that sort of conceit to it, that central message and those ideas about family, and that's for me what makes it Spielbergian. I think casting Mahoney is a great touch for that as well. He's a very much an everyman in the mold of Richard Dreyfuss or Tom Hanks, who Spielberg likes to work with.
And this was very much the year or the 2 years of Mahoney, wasn't it? Because I can't recall whether this was before or after he won the Oscar for Dallas Buyers Club, and he also was in
True Detective.
It's
colloquially
Wave, wasn't he?
It's known as The Reconnaissance because it's his comeback. But he makes that sort of something that could be very, very sterile and scientific. Sort of within touching distance of real, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. His charisma, and I mean, again, known about Mahoney, he is a very emotional person and he's very spiritual and all that type of stuff. So you're right. I mean, I can't imagine any other actor playing, or if it was maybe like an actor like the ads in 2001, that coldness would permeate the film more, and it wouldn't resonate with me, I don't think.
No, right down to he's got that really thick Southern drawl that makes him feel like a kind of the sort of a real guy. I mean, it means that the stretch to think he was ever an astronaut is quite a big one. But so there is that kind of Spielbergian heartbeat. But as I mentioned, actually the visuals, particularly the space visuals, is pure Kubrick. And you mentioned how real and familiar it was. What was the process they went through in making this movie to give a science fiction feel a million miles away from CGI
well, I think as we know, and we've talked about it in some of the earlier videos, is that Nolan is very much an advocate of in-camera effects and also shooting on celluloid, isn't he? And he's sort of leading that campaign now, like a cinema purist, if you like. And Interstellar, when you watch it, it does feel different, even though you've got vast wide shots of a craft in space, which are clearly CGI or have heavy CGI elements. There was no blue screen or green screen used in the film.
Yeah.
So like Tars the robot, that was a mannequin, and you had you'd see the CGI arms and legs and stuff like that. But even in the shots from within the shuttle, when you can see the space outside, that's on a super high definition screen.
Yeah.
And if you watch the making of documentary, I mean, I don't quite understand the technology behind it, but it's not just a screen. Like the screen moves and rotates with, or in relative to and in relation to the. So you get a sense that it feels like there is something physical outside of the window rather than something that's been painted on. And I think with CGI, I don't know, it'll probably always be like this, but I think no matter how realistic it looks, we're very sophisticated and we can perceive the differences. And I think that's really what underscores and allows the emotional resonance of the film to hit, is that it feels so real.
Yeah, definitely. And no, that's a credit to his sort of scrutiny, or his fine tooth, look at making films and the detail. I know for Inception, he built this giant rigs to put sets on, to move them around. So he's no stranger to creating something practically that will feel real. And that's all just a huge part of it. In terms of the bigger meanings, though, or the other readings of this movie, I know that you mentioned a couple of things when we did the Prestige, actually, that I hadn't thought about. You drew a connection. I can't even remember what it was now. You drew a line from the Prestige directly to Interstellar that I'd never seen. Is it about the humanity side of things, or the people, nature versus, maybe it was to do with nature versus sort of science?
I'm actually thinking, what did I say? But yeah, you're right. I think so. If I can, I'll talk about the music a little bit in a minute, because we haven't really addressed Hans Zimmer that much.
No.
And I think for me, come back to the auteur debate, I think the real creative force and the most important creative force in the film this time is Hans Zimmer.
Okay.
And I'll talk about that in a bit. But so throughout the film, there's a constant conflict between the scientific and the ethereal. And Cooper is very much a scientist, as are most of the characters in the film. But what sort of separates, not separates Cooper, but what we also have with Cooper is this deep emotional connection to his daughter. And that ultimately is what I think motivates his actions more than the scientific quest. So all the way through the film, you've got this conflict between love and science. And I think in the Prestige as well, you've got that, the human emotion versus the technological side.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what I find in Interstellar is that Nolan doesn't present an answer as one over the other. Is that they're both compatible, but they're both necessary for the other to function.
Right.
So
symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, I think as what we just talked about as well is that perfect a connection between the practical, and the real stuff, the way he makes his films, that's also underpinned there as well.
Is this before we get on to music then? But I was just going to. The reason I wanted to bring this up is to extend it to the sort of those rare moments where maybe Nolan is talking about something that's happening in the world today. We mentioned The Dark Knight and post 9/11 filmmaking and the anarchy and terrorism. Is this also a maybe a very clear message about global warming and climate change? You said it's an unspecified disaster, but shouldn't we just say this is what
what's ecological?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the film opens in a state of despair, doesn't it? And Earth is on the brink because of ecological disaster. We see dust clouds randomly happening, and throughout the film we see that increase in intensity. But that's also highlighted through Cooper's son in particular, who we see as a young man played by Timothy Chalamet. But when we see the 19-year gap, he's played by Casey Affleck. And the first message that Cooper receives is from his son saying that I'm now a father, but I've lost my son due to illness and famine, and the grandfather as well. So the threat posed by humans, abuse of nature and the consequence of that is increased and magnified throughout the film.
Yeah.
And the scientists are looking for a scientific solution when actually what we find is a human solution, really.
Definitely, which ends up in this kind of to this final payoff. These scenes where Cooper enters a fifth dimension, organized by an unspecified being or super race or God or something like that, which he can kind of use to commune with his daughter. But of course, that sequence of the film, not only being defined by some really quite mad visuals, is, as you said, also defined by the score of this movie, and that's when the music almost becomes a character in this film. And I know this is an area you've studied quite some length for this movie. So tell us more about Hans Zimmer and his role in this film and the music.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll run through the narrative of the music. The narrative and how the music underscores these themes, and hopefully that'll better express what I was trying to say earlier. So if you watch the film, before we start talking about the film, there's a great anecdote where how the creative process started for the film, and Nolan very famously sent Zimmer a handwritten note, and all it said on the note was that the next film was about a father and a son, and there was 2 lines of dialogue, and the lines of dialogue was "Will you come back?" and "Yes," I think was the second line of dialogue, and then Zimmer tells the story that. He started writing a piece of music thinking about his own son, and he said he wrote his most personal, introspective piece of music he's ever written, and then presented to Nolan. And then Nolan said, "Oh, by the way, it's a massive budget sci-fi epic." To which Zimmer responded, like, "How dare you do this to me? This is my most intimate. I've revealed my soul to you, and you tell me it's going to be used to sell a sci-fi film." But then Nolan talks about the importance of that, and this is where I talked about the auteur theory earlier. Nolan actually said that once he had that melody, that initial melody, that he had, quote, the emotional core of his film, and he used to listen to it on repeat as he wrote the actual script itself.
Right.
Okay, so that initial melody is made of 4 notes, and it's played over the opening sequence when we see the titles and we see Cooper. So that's like a main theme, and the entire score is all derivations of that. There are 5 variants of that theme that underscore like the emotional either connection or disconnection Murphy and Cooper. So we start off and it's 1 note, so it's 4 notes, and it's 1 note, and then the second, and then the third, and then the fourth. And then as we see the drone come in, and we see a connection between Cooper and Murphy, that 4-note sequence gets a response. So it turns into an 8-note sequence. So no longer is it just 1, it's dum 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 dum. So throughout the film, that couplet, as it's called, sort of traces and the narrative journey and the emotional journey of Cooper and Murphy, but it acts as what you term connective tissue in the narrative as well. So as Cooper tells Murphy he's going to leave, we shift from a major key to a minor key, and we get quite a somber tone. And then as Cooper's saying, "I will come back," we start to hear the sound effects of the engine and of the rocket, and all the music builds up. But we never get back to that. The synchronized sound. It's broken, and it's in a somber tone. And when he gets to space, it's cut off the sound entirely. So the emotional connection between the characters is just broken.
Right.
And then the next time we get the music is when Cooper gets the messages off his son. So again, we have the couplets, like there's emotional connection, but as Murphy comes on as the older Murphy, the music cuts out entirely, and we get 1 note. So we get 1 character building emotional connection, but Murphy's severed it. So to cut a long story short, then that happens throughout the film, and the music doesn't actually come back, or that sequence of notes doesn't come back until Cooper goes into the dark hole, and we get the music coming back, and we also get this massive uplifting piece of music. And then when we see Murphy at the end, we get a very subtle return to the sequence at the start. So those 2 notes basically act as the way I would describe it is those 2 notes within the soundtrack act as like the emotional feelings or resonance of both characters. And when they're put together, then those characters are a lot closer together. And when they're not together, we're left with a purely cold scientific worldview that is, it may result in an answer, but it's not human, and it's very cold and desolate.
That's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, that's a real lesson right there in just how much, like you said, music tells the story as much as anything. And I've grown up watching movies where the characters have their own themes. John Williams is very good at giving us a theme but I've never known even John Williams, to write the story into the music in that way.
Yeah, and the music is almost entirely produced on an organ.
Well, this is
church organ.
This is the thing that I picked up on, because being a science fiction film and reading these themes into it about, the scientific and the spiritual, it does feel face value like a juxtaposition to use this kind of church organ music with something so scientific. But of course, a spiritual human theme sort of fits in the middle, doesn't it? Bringing those 2 worlds together.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And again, Hans Zimmer, when he's interviewed about this, he said they chose the organ for several reasons. One of them being that when organs were first put into churches, whenever it was, 1500s, 1600s, wherever it was, in Europe, the intent was that it was such a loud, overwhelming sound that it's an attempt to depict the divine. So it's an oral attempt to depict that cannot be perceived.
Wow.
And then so in a normal sci-fi film, you'd expect an electronic score or a normal orchestra. But what they've done with the sound is that basically you've got the dialogue and the character actions for this cold scientific worldview, and then you've got the music, which is this ethereal. You can't, the characters can't perceive it, but it's acting on their narrative journey. So it's this imperceptible force that is guiding everything and binding us together, which is, love.
And that's that sorry, feeling of overwhelmingness, as it were. Definitely, that's what I came out the cinema being most impressed with, was the music and the sound.
Yeah.
I saw it on the Printworks IMAX in Manchester, which is alongside, I think, the one in Waterloo in London is the only other full size IMAX in the country.
Yeah.
And seeing it IMAX visuals and sound, it was overwhelming, but I loved it. I enjoyed being overwhelmed by it, I think.
Oh yeah, and I've seen a lot of criticisms of the film, like researching it, and at the time, saying, it's too loud, and I think they missed the point of the sounds. Like, the sounds that really stood out for me in the cinema is the first time the rocket leaves the atmosphere, and like you could feel the building shaking. But the point is that the sounds, like the emotion, is so overwhelming that it's just overwhelming everything, all of our senses, and then it just totally cuts off, and we're left with this stark reality that Cooper's alone and he's abandoned his child, basically.
Definitely.
Another final point about the organ as well is, I love the way Zimmer talked about it. He said the whole point with an organ is that it has to breathe to make noise. It has to inhale air and then exhale noise. And he said that's fantastic. So the music is the human emotional element to sort of combine with the scientific.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that. That's pure. That's such an interesting approach to filmmaking, is to make sure everything that's there contributes to the telling of that central story about love and family relationships. How does it slot in? I mean, to his other movies, do you feel it's part of an evolution of work, or because we know that obviously the Dark Knight trilogy is more conventional than some of his other narrative films, but does it stand out by itself, or is it just a change in filmmaking?
I think it's, for me personally, I think it stands out in many ways. I mean, I think it stands out within the genre, especially if we just say like 21st century Hollywood sci-fi. Up until Blade Runner 2049, for me, it was totally unique in terms of scale and the feel of it, because, so it stands out within, the context of the industry. But within Nolan's work, it does stand out for me. But it's not because of the lack of, narrative. It doesn't draw attention to the narrative or anything like that. It stands out because it's so emotional. And also, I don't know, I can't quite, it feels less Nolan-like. Maybe that's like, it's not as cold.
Possibly.
But I think what I've realized in my ranking is that basically the films he writes, when he writes with a co-writer, they're my top 5 films, and the films he writes alone generally fall towards the end of the list.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
And because he wrote this with his brother, and it's an idea they've had for quite a while, and it was actually Jonathan Nolan's idea.
Right.
So I think it allows Nolan to just focus purely on the cinematic side, or more on that,
Definitely. I mean, it's an interesting one, because I think like all of us, that having that number 7 on my list belies how much I do respect and love this film. I think it's got so much to offer. It's a very long movie as well.
Yeah.
But those performances are great. I think Jessica Chastain is great value in anything that she does. And do you know what? One of my favorite performances is the droid, the TARS. I think it's fantastic incredible character. I mean, being a sci-fi fans, that you tend to have your favorite robot characters. No, but in terms of humor, it's up there with K2SO from Rogue One. I think it's a great sort of foil for the Cooper character. But no, I do love it, and it's really interesting that you've mentioned that the emotional core is what drives you to it. The next film on our list that we're going to be discussing was my number 1. It's Inception, and funnily enough, that for that reason is what draws me to that. But I'll come to that. I'll come to that next time. But it's the same reason why. But yeah, brilliant. Okay.
When you mentioned TARS, they're actually talking about this theme of the scientific and the human experience, if you like. Are sometimes seen as at odds in sci-fi, but they combine in this one. And there's a line when in one of the amazing set pieces, the docking sequence, is when they're trying to save the ship, and Cooper's thinking about, I need to save the ship because if it don't, my daughter.
Yeah.
And TARS says, Cooper, it's impossible. And Cooper just replies, no, it's not impossible, it's necessary.
Yeah.
And it's that human, that love that's inspiring him, pushes him onto that extra edge and allows the scientific stuff to flourish as well.
And apparently a lot of the scientific stuff is, I know he wrote it with Kip Thorne, but did Neil deGrasse Tyson have some involvement in this, I believe, as well?
We critique the film because he critiques films afterwards, doesn't he?
Does he?
So he wasn't involved in the production or
right.
film. But it's interesting. Neil deGrasse Tyson, so he's a famous American scientist, and he critiques films and who use science. And I don't know if you know this, but after Titanic came out, deGrasse Tyson wrote James Cameron a letter saying the constellations you've got in your film, they don't match the time period. So in the special edition or the re-release of Titanic, Cameron redid the CGI sky to make it time accurate.
That's a brilliant Easter egg. Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I didn't like Titanic so much. Maybe I should go and watch it again. Maybe.
But Kip Thorne actually won a Nobel Prize for his work on wormholes, and the work his work that then contributed to the script won him a Nobel Prize. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So apparently it's possible.
There we go. Yeah, that's all you need to know, isn't it? Okay. Or as the film tells us, I think you just need to know that if you follow this like this, and go like that, that's it. So if you haven't seen, that's a spoiler, by the way.
There is. I can't remember the phrase itself, but it's in one of the scenes where they're doing that. But there's one phrase Anne Hathaway uses, and it's maybe the criticism is that he uses too much exposition.
Yeah. But
there's a phrase she uses to describe time dilation, and it always stands out as just one too many times. It really breaks the. It's like, all right, we get it, because it is.
It's a long film. You can forgive them for that. You do need people to keep up, but no, great. That's a really good assessment of the movie. And like I said, I'm glad you. I know it's a favourite of yours, absolutely. And like I said, I think watching it again gave me a new appreciation, particularly now that I'm a dad as well. That makes a big difference.
Yeah, and just my final point on it, one of the things I love, and we've talked about before, is set pieces.
Okay,
the end. We talked about the end of The Dark Knight Rises. That bit where he breaks through the building. Gives me chills thinking about it. But there's some set pieces in this that are just unparalleled for me. I mean, the docking sequence, but when Cooper's deciding to descend into the black hole, like the music and the visuals is just remarkable.
It's proper cinema, isn't it? And that love of big screen storytelling comes through. Nolan's work will never be designed for a small screen. And if as much as we would love anybody who's not seen any of his films to join in and watch these movies, don't watch them on your phone, please.
No. And turn it up as loud as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
Your neighbours will hate you, but it'll be worth it.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, the timing of when I watched this movie was just integral, because I knew that I needed to have the surround sound as loud as it would go. But no, I do love all that. Great. Okay, were there any other points you wanted to make, Matt? I know you could talk about this all day, this movie.
Not on that comes to mind. I'll probably, as soon as we end the video, I'll have like a long list of things and start texting you. Well, no, again, just amazing performances, isn't it, as well? Like Anne Hathaway, it's the second Nolan film she's worked on after Dark Knight. And I think watching her in Dark Knight and some of her other roles and seeing her in this, it just shows how amazing she is, as a performer.
She's wasted in other movies as well. It took a long time for, I think, filmmakers to realise her full potential, really. But no, she's great. Yeah, and actually, and we've managed to avoid one spoiler actually, which involves a cameo of someone that you don't expect. And of course, Michael Caine plays his sort of ubiquitous part as well. Slightly against type for a Nolan movie, actually. It's quite
different, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I won't spoil it. But just to finish for me at least, is that idea of filmmakers making films about films and drawing.
Yes, we have to speak. We've done it every time so far, but go on.
That particular actor in that role. When he appears, it was a massive shock for me. And you think, and then obviously his fate, what happens to him? It's a message to the audience, isn't it? Saying, no, this is not how it's. This is not going to go the way you expected. This isn't a normal film just because it's a star.
Yeah.
And and that character's demise is incredibly shocking, because I think at that point you're like now what? And
definitely.
Stars to save us, don't we?
Yeah, completely. That's a good point, actually. Yeah, there's of course the reading of this, and also, like you said, the kind of the as you mentioned before, the kind of scale of looking at the mixing the natural with the spiritual and the scientific. That's a metaphor for cinema every time, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
it's using technology to express something that's intangible.
Yeah, the love transcends everything. Well, that's why 100 years of filmmaking, isn't it?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, well, great. Thanks very much for that, Matt. Like I said, we'll be back with Inception, and then finally we're going to review Dunkirk. Of our top 10, and then of course it just remains one film left to review, and that'll be the newest movie, Tenet. So I look forward to that. Brilliant. All right, thanks very much.
Thanks, great. Bye.
Cheerio, everyone out there. Bye bye.